A server secretly slipped me a note during my half-brother's birthday dinner that said, "Run to the emergency exit now. Don't look back." 5 minutes later, a private investigator told me my wine had been drugged, and the dangerous mountain curve where they planned to stage my accident was the same place my husband had died 3 months earlier. A server secretly slipped me a note during my half-brother's birthday dinner that said, "Run to the emergency exit now. Don't look back." 5 minutes later, a private investigator told me my wine had been drugged, and the dangerous mountain curve where they planned to stage my accident was the same place my husband had died 3 months earlier. The deputy's voice cracked on the word freeze, and for one stupid half-second I thought he meant Seth. He didn't. He was staring down at a folded piece of paper he'd just pulled from the inside pocket of Seth's jacket, and his face had gone the color of old drywall. "Sarge," he said, not looking up. "There's a second name on this list." Everything in the room kept moving, Valerie sobbing into the carpet with her wrists zip-tied behind her, another deputy reading Seth his rights while Seth screamed something about lawyers, Pierce standing frozen by the shattered coffee table with the wire receiver still clipped to his belt. But for me, the room went dead silent. I remember the specific stupid detail that my brain latched onto. The paper was torn from a yellow legal pad, the kind Valerie kept in the kitchen drawer next to the takeout menus. She'd probably written it standing at her own counter. I lunged for it. A hand caught my shoulder before I got 2 feet. "Ma'am, I need you to stay back." The man who said it was maybe 50. Silver at the temples, badge clipped to a belt that also held a radio squawking static. "Detective Marcus Feldman, County Financial Crimes and Major Case Unit. I need this scene preserved before anybody touches anything." "That's my family," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. "If there's another name on that list, I need to know whose it is. And you will, through the proper channel, not by grabbing evidence out of a deputy's hand." He said it kindly, which somehow made it worse. 19 years on the job, I'd learn later, 12 of them in fraud, 7 in violent crimes before that. He knew exactly how to sound patient while a witness's whole world tilted sideways in front of him. They bagged the list. I watched it go into a clear plastic sleeve, watched a deputy write something on a label with a Sharpie, and I caught maybe 4 letters before it disappeared. A capital W, then what might have been an A. My stomach did something ugly and cold. Walter. My father's name was Walter. I didn't say it out loud. I didn't have to. Pierce was already looking at me the way you look at someone standing on the edge of something. I'd been sitting in a folding chair in the sheriff's substation parking lot for 40 minutes, wrapped in a scratchy blanket a deputy had given me for shock when Feldman finally came to find me. Pierce hadn't left my side. He'd given his statement twice already, once to a deputy on scene, once inside. And every time someone asked him a question, he answered it in that flat, careful PI cadence, like a man used to being the only sane witness in a room. "It's not confirmed," Feldman said, crouching so he was eye level with me. "I want to be straight with you about that. We recovered a handwritten list with 3 names on it. Yours was crossed out, which, given what we walked into tonight, tells us something about timing, not about you being safe. The second name reads W. Reyes. There's a third name we haven't identified yet, just initials. That's my father," I said. "Walter Reyes. He's Valerie's husband. He built Reyes Development. He signs the checks that pay for everything Seth's been stealing." Feldman's jaw tightened in that particular way I was starting to recognize as a cop trying not to react in front of a civilian. "Where is your father right now?" I didn't know. That was the terrifying part. I hadn't spoken to him in 9 days, not since the funeral reception when he told me I needed to let Clayton rest and stop asking why the accident report never named a mechanical cause. I called him anyway, standing in that parking lot with the blanket slipping off my shoulder, and it went straight to voicemail. I called the office. It went to voicemail too. It was 9:52 p.m. on a Thursday. My father didn't take vacations and he didn't turn his phone off, not since my mother died, not since he became the kind of man who checked his phone during his own colonoscopy. Pierce was already pulling up something on his own phone, scrolling fast. "Your dad drives a black Range Rover, right? 2023? Dealer plate frame from Cedar Hollow Land Rover? How do you?" Because 2 days ago, before any of this happened tonight, I photographed that exact vehicle parked outside Kessler Auto and Diesel on Route 9. He turned the screen toward me. There it was. My father's SUV, nose in at a bay door. A man in a grease-stained shirt leaning under the open hood. I didn't know why I was taking the picture at the time. I was following Seth's van and your dad's Rover happened to be in the same lot. Now I know why. I felt my hands start shaking before my brain finished catching up to why. Here's the thing nobody tells you about the moment you realize your husband was murdered, and then realize the same people are circling your father. Your body reacts faster than your mind will let you admit it out loud. My mind was still trying to construct a version of events where this was a coincidence, where the list was old, where my father wasn't in danger tonight, this specific Thursday night in October, at 9:57 p.m. My hands weren't waiting for my mind to catch up. They shook so badly I dropped my phone twice, trying to call him a third time. I told myself it was probably an old grudge list. I said out loud. To nobody. to the blanket, to the cracked asphalt under the folding chair. Seth's owed people money for years. Maybe it's not even connected to tonight. Pierce didn't argue with me. He just turned his phone back around and showed me the timestamp on the photo. 2 days ago. 2 days before my own dinner. 2 days before someone slipped a vial into a wine glass meant for me. Feldman was already on his radio, requesting a welfare check unit be routed to the Reyes development offices and to my father's home address, which I gave him from memory, my voice doing that flat, mechanical thing voices do when the person talking has left her own body for a minute. I want to be clear with you, Feldman said, crouching again. Your father not answering his phone at 10 p.m. is not, by itself, evidence of anything. People turn their ringers off. People go to dinner. I've got units rolling to check on him right now, and that's the right move regardless of what that list says. But I need you to understand something else. And I need you to hear it, because it matters for what happens next. What? Everything we do from here has to be clean. The wire Mr. Holloway ran tonight, we're going to fight to keep that admissible. And California's a one-party consent state, so you consenting to wear it gives us a real shot. But if I go kick down a mechanic store on Route 9 tonight, based on a torn-off note and a photograph a private investigator took 2 days ago, any halfway decent defense attorney gets it thrown out in about 4 minutes, and it poisons everything else we're building. I need probable cause that'll survive a judge's signature. Not just my gut telling me you're right. I understood every word of it and hated every word of it in equal measure. The welfare check came back at 10:41 p.m. My father's house was dark. His housekeeper said he'd left around 6 for a site walkthrough, and his office assistant, a soft-spoken woman named Priya, who I'd met exactly twice, confirmed by text that he'd dropped his Range Rover at Kessler Auto that morning for what he'd called a squeal in the brakes, probably nothing, and picked up a loaner, and that he'd told her he planned to swing back to Kessler's that evening to grab the Rover once it was done, because he wanted to drive it up to CEO, the lake house this weekend. The lake house was 40 minutes up Route 9, past Curve 7. I called him again, straight to voicemail. I texted him, "Dad, call me now, it's urgent, do not drive the Range Rover." 3 gray bubbles, no delivery confirmation. His phone was off, or dead, or somewhere it couldn't get a signal, which described most of that mountain road. Once you pass the last cell tower outside town. He's going to think I've lost it, I said. He already thinks grief's made me paranoid. He told me that at Clayton's funeral, verbatim. Grief makes people see conspiracies, Savannah. If I show up right now with a story about a note in Seth's jacket, he's going to hand me a Xanax and tell me to go home. Pierce was quiet for a second. Then, so we don't ask him to believe a story. We show him the shop. I want to be honest about something because I promised myself I'd stop lying to people who were trying to help me. Even by omission. I didn't wait for Detective Feldman's warrant. I know now that was reckless. I know it could have collapsed the entire case if it had gone differently. At 11:15 p.m., with Pierce driving and me white-knuckling the door handle of his beat-up Tacoma, we went to Kessler Auto and Diesel ourselves. The shop sat at the base of Route 9 like a tooth knocked loose from a jaw. 3 bays, a gravel lot, a sign with 2 letters burned out so it read, Kessel Auto and Dyes. 1 bay door was up. Fluorescent light spilled onto the gravel. A man was under a lifted black Range Rover, and even from the truck, I recognized the dealer plate frame. Brody Kessler was maybe 45, built like someone who'd spent 30 years hauling engine blocks, with a Marlboro tucked behind one ear, even though the shop reeked of no smoking around brake fluid common sense. I'd never met him. I knew his name only from the photograph Pierce had shown a courtroom's worth of nobody yet, the one of Brody taking an envelope from Seth in an alley, 2 days before Clayton's brakes failed on a road he'd driven 1,000 times without incident. Pierce killed the headlights 300 feet out and let the truck roll the last stretch on momentum alone, gravel popping under the tires like static. My pulse was doing something arrhythmic and stupid. I could hear a radio playing classic rock somewhere inside the second bay, tinny and cheerful, completely indifferent to what was happening under that lift. "Stay in the truck," Pierce said. "I mean it, Savannah. I'm not a cop. I don't have the authority to stop him from doing anything to that vehicle, and neither do you. And if he sees us, he could finish whatever he's doing in about 90 seconds. I didn't stay in the truck. I want to be honest about that too. I walked straight into that bay with my phone already recording, and I said the only thing I could think to say, which was true, and which I said as calmly as I have ever said anything in my life. That's my father's car. Step away from it." Brody Kessler looked up from under the Rover with a socket wrench still in his hand, and for exactly 1 second, I will remember for the rest of my life, because it was the second everything became undeniable. His face did the thing Valerie's face had done at the dinner table when the server handed me the wrong glass. It didn't crumble. It calculated. "Ma'am, this is a closed shop after hours. You can't be back here. I know what you did to my husband's car in July," I said. "I know what you were paid to do to this one tonight. My father is going to walk in here in the next 20 minutes to pick this up, and I am not leaving until either he's safe or the police are here. Your choice which..." I know what you were paid to do to this one tonight. My father is going to walk in here in the next 20 minutes to pick this up, and I am not leaving until either he's safe or the police are here. Your choice which one comes first." He set the wrench down slowly, too slowly. My whole body went cold watching him do it, because a man who's innocent sets a wrench down fast, annoyed, defensive. A man who's guilty sets it down like he's deciding whether he needs both hands free. "You need to leave," he said, and took a step toward me, and I made myself hold my ground, even though every nerve in my body was screaming to back toward the gravel lot. "I don't know what you think you saw. I think I saw a man about to kill my father the same way he killed my husband." My voice came out steadier than I felt. Behind Brody, on the workbench, I could see it now. The brake pads with the blue tape, replaced with ease, sitting there like evidence in a diorama built for exactly this moment. "And I think you're about to find out that the second you touched that car, you stopped being someone's employee and started being the only person in this whole thing who can't hide behind a family name." He didn't answer that. He just looked past me, toward the gravel lot, toward Pierce's truck, calculating distance and options the way I imagine he'd calculated brake fluid bleed rates for 6 years without anyone ever catching him at it. That's when the deputies arrived. Feldman had gotten a rolling patrol unit to swing by, just to check the area, which was as far as he could stretch things without a warrant. And I have never in my life been so grateful to see a spotlight sweep across a gravel lot. Brody Kessler didn't confess that night. Men like him don't. Not without a lawyer whispering in one ear and 40 years of experience whispering in the other. But he also didn't drive away. And he didn't have a good answer for why a customer's brake lines were sitting disconnected on a rolling cart 6 feet from the lift, or why there was a second set of brake pads, used, not new, resting on his workbench with a strip of blue painter's tape on them that read, in Sharpie, "Replace W these." Detective Feldman got his warrant by 1 a.m., a Cedar Hollow County judge named Talia Brennan, signing off from her own kitchen table in a bathrobe, according to the deputy who drove the paperwork to her house. By 3 a.m., a forensic tech from the county crime lab was photographing the underside of my father's Range Rover under work lights, while I sat on the tailgate of Pierce's truck wrapped in a second scratchy blanket, watching the one thing in 3 months that had actually made sense. My father, it turned out, was fine. He'd been at a zoning meeting until 10:30, then stopped for a late dinner with a contractor, phone dead in his jacket pocket the entire time because he'd forgotten his charger that morning. The single most mundane explanation in the world for the 2 hours that had nearly stopped my heart. He arrived at Kessler Auto at 11:52 p.m., expecting to pick up his car, and instead found his daughter sitting on the tailgate of a stranger's truck surrounded by police tape, looking, he told me later, like I'd seen a ghost. No, like I'd become one. I didn't get to have the conversation I wanted to have with him that night. Instead, I watched his face go through the same 4 stages Valerie's had gone through at dinner, and Brody's had gone through under the lift: confusion, disbelief, calculation, and then, finally, on my father, something I hadn't seen on any of them: fear, real fear. The kind that comes from a 64-year-old man realizing that his wife and his son had apparently decided he was worth more to them dead than alive. The 3 weeks after that night were the strangest of my life, and I say that as someone who'd already survived a drugged wine glass and a knife at her throat. Grief has a rhythm to it. Betrayal has a rhythm too, once you know it's coming. But this, the slow procedural unearthing of exactly how deep it went, had no rhythm at all. It came in bursts, usually delivered by phone call, usually starting with someone saying my name in that particular, gentle but professional tone that meant I should sit down first. Assistant District Attorney Renata Marsh called on a Tuesday to walk me through what the second name on the list actually meant for the case. She was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with the clipped efficiency of someone who'd tried 100 cases and had learned exactly how much comfort to offer a victim before it started sounding like a script. The list itself isn't the crime, she told me, sitting across from me at a conference table with a manila folder labeled Exhibit G in front of her. The list is corroboration. What makes it powerful is that it matches the wire recording almost word for word. Seth told you on tape that Brody could fix anything for the right price, and now we've got Brody's own workbench proving he meant that literally. Separately, that's circumstantial. Together with your father's brake lines disconnected 2 hours before he was scheduled to drive them up Route 9, it's close to airtight. What about Clayton? I asked. I'd been waiting 3 weeks to ask it out loud to someone whose job it was to answer honestly. Was his death on a list too? She slid a photocopy across the table. It was a page from a small black notebook recovered from Brody's shop safe, the handwriting cramped and businesslike, like a man logging oil changes instead of murders. 3 entries, 3 dates. The middle one read, C. Cole, 714, brake line, rear L, partial. Note, don't full sever, needs to look like where. I read it 4 times before the words stopped rearranging themselves into something my mind refused to hold. He was told to make it look natural, Renata said quietly. Not a sudden failure, a slow bleed of brake fluid over roughly a week, so by the time your husband hit that curve, there'd be nothing left. And it would read as long-term neglect instead of sabotage. Whoever built this plan understood exactly how these investigations work. They understood understood accident reconstruction. That's not something a gambling addict and his mother figure out on their own. So who did? Renata didn't answer that directly. Instead, she told me about Grant Ellison. Grant Ellison, a certified fraud examiner with 11 years at Meridian Life and Casualty, had been quietly investigating my family for 4 months before any of this happened, since roughly 2 weeks after Clayton's death, when a routine actuarial flag went off on his $2.1 million term policy. A death within the contestability period, paired with a beneficiary designation that had been changed 8 months before the accident, was standard issue red flag material. Ellison had pulled the file, cross-referenced it against Meridian's broader claims database out of habit more than suspicion, and found something that made him sit up straight in his cubicle on a Tuesday afternoon in August. 2 years earlier, Meridian had paid out a smaller policy, $340,000, on a woman named Naomi Holloway. Cause of death, fall from a hiking trail outside Cedar Hollow. Beneficiary, her business partner, a man who'd since dissolved the LLC they'd co-owned and quietly moved his remaining assets into an account that, Ellison discovered, had wired $60,000 to a Cedar Hollow contractor named Brody Kessler 4 days before Naomi's death. I already knew that name, Pierce's sister. I met Grant Ellison myself the following week at a Meridian regional office that looked more like an accounting firm than anything I associated with insurance. Beige carpet, a wall of filing cabinets, a coffee maker that had clearly seen better decades. He was younger than I expected to, maybe 35, with the particular exhausted precision of a man who spends his days proving that grief is sometimes also a crime scene. He walked me through Clayton's file page by page, his voice careful, professional, occasionally apologetic in a way that had nothing to do with fault and everything to do with decency. I flagged your husband's policy in April, he told me, sliding a folder across the desk labeled with a claim number instead of a name, the way these things get filed once they stop being about a person and start being about a case. Contestability period, beneficiary change 8 months prior, single vehicle fatality on a road with a documented history of guardrail complaints the county never acted on. Any one of those, on its own, means nothing. All three together get a case examiner's attention. What I didn't have until 3 weeks ago was a name to attach to the pattern. Now I've got Brody Kessler's. And once I had that, I ran it against every claim we've paid out in this region for the last 8 years. He turned his laptop screen toward me. A spreadsheet, rows and rows of claim numbers, 3 of them highlighted yellow. This isn't proof of anything by itself, he said. It's a pattern an actuary flags and a detective has to build into a case. But I wanted you to see it, because I think you've spent 3 months being told this was random, and it wasn't. It was never random. It was a business model. When Ellison and Feldman compared notes, which took an embarrassingly long time, 3 separate agencies not talking to each other being its own kind of institutional failure, the ordinary, boring, bureaucratic kind rather than anyone's malice, the picture that emerged wasn't a family tragedy. It was a system. Brody Kessler had, over 6 years, serviced at least 4 vehicles belonging to people connected to insurance payouts or inheritance disputes. Always the same signature. Partial, deliberate wear designed to read as neglect, timed to specific mountain roads with poor guardrails and bad cell coverage, always paid for through a laundering chain that ran, eventually, back to a bookmaking operation in the city that Seth owed money to. A man everyone in that world apparently just called Kaz, who, Feldman's financial crimes unit, had been trying to build a racketeering case against for 2 years, and had never had the right thread to pull. Seth's $3.4 million debt to Kaz's operation, it turned out, wasn't just motive for stealing from his own family. It was leverage. Kaz's people had, according to bank records Ellison subpoenaed, floated Seth's debt in exchange for referrals, a nice clean euphemism for feeding Brody Kessler new targets whenever someone in Seth's orbit had a life insurance policy worth the trouble and a mountain road nearby. I sat in Renata Marsh's conference room and listened to all of this and felt something strange happen in my chest. Not grief. Not exactly, though grief was still in there, permanent as a scar, something closer to vertigo. My husband hadn't died because of a random argument or a jealous rage or even, really, because Valerie hated me specifically. He died because he was a line item in someone else's spreadsheet. The hardest conversation wasn't with the detective or the prosecutor, it was with my father. 3 days after the Kessler shop, sitting in his study with the lights too bright and a glass of scotch he hadn't touched in front of him. I told you at the funeral lights too bright and a glass of scotch he hadn't touched in front of him. I told you at the funeral that grief makes people paranoid, he said. He wouldn't look at me. I need you to know I've replayed that conversation about 400 times since Thursday. You didn't know. I didn't want to know. His voice cracked on the last word, and I watched my father, a man who had built a development company from nothing, who had never once in my adult life let me see him cry, not even at my mother's funeral, put both hands over his face. Valerie handled the household accounts. I handed her the checkbook when your mother died because I couldn't stand looking at numbers that reminded me of anything. I signed what she put in front of me. I let Seth run the equipment leasing division because it kept him out of my hair and it made her happy. Every single choice I made to keep the peace in that house was a door I left open for them. I didn't tell him it wasn't his fault because I don't think platitudes help people the way we pretend they do, and because some of it, honestly, probably was his fault, in the specific way that willful blindness is its own kind of choice. But I did tell him the other thing, the thing Detective Feldman had told me in that parking lot that I'd needed 3 weeks to actually believe, that everything from here forward had to be clean, methodical, built to survive a defense attorney's worst day. Falling apart wouldn't undo 4 months of Grant Ellison's actuarial flags or 6 weeks of Pierce's surveillance photos or 1 torn sheet of yellow legal pad paper. Only the process would. My father hired his own forensic accountant within the week, separate from Ellison, separate from the DA's office, a woman named Priya's cousin actually, small towns being small towns, to comb through Reyes Development's books line by line. It took 11 weeks. It found $1, $7 million in equipment leases that didn't correspond to any actual equipment, all of it signed off by Seth, all of it feeding eventually back into payments that traced to Kaz's operation. Denise Okafor from the Cedar Hollow Tribune ran the first story in December, 4 days after Brody Kessler's arraignment. I want to say I felt vindicated when it published. Mostly I felt exposed, in the specific way that being believed by strangers on the internet feels different from being believed by the people who were supposed to love you first. The headline read, "Local mechanic charged in accident deaths linked to insurance scheme," and under it, in smaller type, a subhead that made my stomach drop all over again. Sheriff's office says case may connect to at least 3 prior deaths across 2 counties. 3, not 2. Ellison's team, cross-referencing further out once they knew what pattern to search for, found a 3rd case, an elderly man in the next county over whose truck had gone off a switchback 18 months earlier, whose $500,000 policy had paid out to a nephew who'd since disappeared from any address the county could find. That case reopened as a homicide investigation in January. It's still open as I write this. Okafor interviewed me for maybe 90 minutes total, spread across 2 conversations, and she was careful in a way I came to respect. She didn't ask me to perform grief for her readers, and she double-checked every fact against the court filings before she'd print it. People are going to want a villain they can hate cleanly, she told me over coffee, the recorder between us. Real stories don't work that way. Your stepmother's a villain and also apparently spent years managing your father's late wife's charity foundation without pay. Your stepbrother's a villain and also, according to his own attorney, has been trying to get into a gambling recovery program since he was 22, and nobody in your family ever took him seriously enough to make him go. None of that excuses what they did. It just means the truth is messier than the headline. I try to print the messier version. I appreciated that more than I expected to. Valerie's attorney tried in February to get the wiretap thrown out. Exactly the fight Feldman had warned me about that first night in the parking lot. The motion argued that Pierce, operating as an unlicensed party inside a private residence under false pretenses, the server disguise, had violated wiretapping statutes regardless of my consent. Renata Marsh spent 6 weeks building the counter-argument, and I sat through the suppression hearing in a wooden gallery chair that made my back ache, watching lawyers argue about the precise legal definition of reasonable expectation of privacy in a dining room where a woman had just tried to have her stepdaughter murdered. Judge Brennan, the same judge who'd signed the Kessler warrant from her kitchen table, denied the motion. California's one-party consent law meant that because I had knowingly agreed to wear the wire, the recording was admissible regardless of Pierce's methods of gaining entry, so long as the entry itself wasn't independently illegal, and catering staff badges, it turned out, weren't hard for a licensed PI to obtain through entirely legal channels. Pierce had simply asked the catering company if he could shadow a shift, paid them for the privilege, and told them exactly enough of the truth to get a yes. It was clever, and it was legal, and it held up. Seth took a plea in March. Conspiracy to commit murder, conspiracy to commit fraud, testimony against Brody Kessler and against 2 of Kaz's associates, in exchange for a sentence of 14 years instead of the 25 to life he was staring down otherwise. I sat 2 rows behind him at the plea hearing and watched the back of his neck the whole time, waiting to feel something like satisfaction. Mostly I felt tired. He turned around once, right before they let him out, and mouthed something at me I'm still not sure I read correctly. It might have been, sorry. It might have been nothing at all. I've stopped needing to know which. Valerie didn't take a plea. She went to trial in June and it lasted 11 days, and the jury was out for 6 hours before they came back with guilty on all 4 counts. Conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, insurance fraud, and racketeering. That last charge finally giving Feldman's financial crimes unit the thread they'd been trying to pull on Kaz's operation for 2 years. She's serving 25 to life at a facility 3 hours north of here. I have not visited. I don't think I ever will, though I've stopped feeling guilty about that particular decision, which took longer than the decision itself did. Brody Kessler's trial is scheduled for the fall. Grant Ellison tells me Meridian has already begun clawing back Naomi Holloway's payout from the business partner's estate, since he's now a named co-conspirator, and that 2 other insurers in the region have opened their own reviews of decade-old accident claims, now that the pattern has a name attached to it. Kaz, real name Augustin Kazarian, I learned eventually from Okafor's third story, was indicted on racketeering charges in April. His trial is scheduled for next spring. There is apparently always someone else the thread leads to, if you're willing to keep pulling. My father sold his stake in Reyes Development in August. He didn't have to. The fraud charges against Seth didn't implicate the company itself, and Ellison's forensic team ultimately determined my father hadn't known about a single dollar of the embezzlement, but he told me he couldn't sit in that office anymore without seeing Valerie's handwriting on old memos. He bought a smaller place, a duplex 20 minutes from mine, and he calls me now most Sundays. Actual phone calls, not texts, which is new for us, and which I've decided not to examine too closely in case examining it makes it stop. Pierce closed his sister's file in September. Not the county's file. That one's still technically open pending Brody's trial. But his own. The one he'd been keeping in a banker's box in his apartment for 2 years. The one that started this whole thing before I ever knew his name. He showed it to me once, at a diner off Route 9, ironically close to where the whole nightmare had nearly ended a second time. Newspaper clippings, bank statements, a photograph of Naomi at maybe 25, laughing at something outside the frame, the kind of photograph that makes a stranger look like someone you would have liked. I used to think I was going to catch whoever did it, and that would be the end of the feeling, he told me, closing the box. Turns out the feeling doesn't really end. It just gets somewhere to put itself down for a while. We started a small investigative consultancy together in October. Nothing dramatic. Mostly insurance fraud referrals from Grant Ellison and background work for 2 other attorneys in the county who'd heard how our case turned out. It gives the whole thing a shape I didn't expect it to have. I spent 3 months as a woman other people were investigating things to protect, a target on somebody's yellow legal pad. Now I spend my days helping find the next list before someone else has to read their own name off it in a police parking lot at 10 o'clock at night. My father is alive. That's not a small thing, and I've stopped apologizing to myself for how much it still matters. Months later, more than the trials, more than the headlines, more than watching Valerie's face when the verdict came back. Every other piece of justice in this story is real, and I'm grateful for all of it. Brody's shop is closed. Kaz is awaiting trial. Meridian is clawing back money from people who shouldn't have been paid. Denise Okafor's stories are sitting in a public record that can't be quietly buried, the way Clayton's accident report almost was. But the piece that actually lets me sleep is smaller than all of that. He picked up the phone on the second ring last Sunday. He always does now. That's the only inheritance any of us actually needed.